This can't be live. It feels right here.
You asked for the truth, didn't you?
I don't know what's true anymore.
They can fake a riot now down to the ashes in your lungs, and somehow it still feels real. Truth isn't dead, it's franchised.
No, this is the street. I was just here.
Loop detected. Reconstructing.
Who's talking? Is this real?
I can't tell what's real anymore. One minute it's the street, the next it's the studio or some feed of me saying words I never said. Every story I chase folds back on itself. Facts, fakes.
I used to think the camera couldn't lie. Now it tells any story you pay it to.
If the record is broken, we hold on to each other. That's all that's left.
Rashomon on steroids. 4 episodes from the end of the world. First-person narrative by a journalist who once believed in the evidence of his eyes. Prologue: the day the fire alarm lost its meaning. On the morning the city learned that sirens could be faked better than they could be heard, I was standing at the corner of 7th and Grey with a coffee cooling in my hand. An ambulance tore past, lights rippling in a textbook pattern, and nobody moved. A bicyclist stared at the shimmering reflection in a cafe window and shook his head. Nice render. 2 pedestrians stepped off the curb, immune to the air horn. The driver leaned on the siren and swore into a radio that may well have been an app. I didn't move either. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd been burned before. Everyone had. We were all waiting for the verification code of authenticity to slide into our feeds, wearing the emotional equivalent of rubber gloves. No little green badge, no panic. The ambulance might as well have been a wildlife documentary, amazing resolution, suspect narrative. That was the morning I began to understand that when reality requires 2-factor authentication, it stops being reality and starts being a service. Days later, I would file the last piece under my name at the paper. Weeks after that, a court would tell me that truth was not the standard. Harm minimization was. Somewhere in the middle, I would break 3 promises, make 2 better ones, and discover the only kind of anchor that still held. What follows is not a confession and not a defense. It's 4 episodes, like a mini-series I didn't want to star in, each with a stranger's cameo and a conclusion I did not anticipate. I used to write in the third person. The third person hides. The first person bleeds. This will bleed. Episode 1. The first clip is the deepest. The video arrived at 9:13 p.m., stitched and subtitled by anonymous hands with the kind of skill you can either buy with cash or cultivate with devotion. A paramedic, name withheld, kneels on a tile floor swirled with dried footprints. An elderly man reaches for her sleeve. She pushes his hand away. She looks left, looks right, tags a pediatric victim with a red band, and speaks into her mic. Her voice is muffled by a mask, but the subtitle nails it. Blue tags go to the overflow. If they die, they die. I watched it loop until my cursor drifted. There were details that bit into my eyes like grit. A rolling shutter wobble as someone pans too fast. The faint flicker of LED fixtures at 60 Hz. Powerline noise tucked in the audio like a whisper from the electrical grid. These were the old reliables. Once upon a time, when you saw powerline hum at a country's standard frequency, you could infer a location. Now every respectable generator could imitate its own EMF ghost. Our desk channel lit up with variations of run it and wait for provenance. My editor Ezra was a tower of beige calm with a tie like a wound. He pinged me in a private window. You still talk to that analyst, the one with the ear? He meant Ava Kern, the closest thing we had to a forensic synesthete. Ava could listen to a microphone's character like a musician listens to a violin's wood. She'd been a recording engineer before the plague of perfect simulation turned audio into a magician's choice. I patched her in. The video pulsed again on my screen, too smooth, too certain. Too clean PRNU, she said. Translate. Photo response non-uniformity, she said, as if it were a person we both knew. Every sensor has a fingerprint. Old forgeries ignored it. This one respects it. It's not injected. It's, how can I say this? Grown. The noise field breathes with the ISO changes. That used to be impossible. It isn't anymore. Real, Ava sighed. Real isn't a property, it's a contract. This clip has done the paperwork, but the subtitles... What? They're too good. Human speech is not a metronome. Even when you can't quite make out the words, the syllable boundaries smear. Here, the subtitle snaps to each consonant like it was snapped to a grid. That's a clue, not proof. We took axial measurements like surgeons. We checked the timecode drift. We looked for mocap artifacts in the elbows. We traced the reflections in the polished floor, the way highlights scatter when a lens is dirty. We found nothing definitive. I wrote the piece anyway. I did it in the old style, with my own caution woven in, my own doubts for grounded. It ran at 11 p.m. under the headline, When Triage Becomes Triage. It was neither exculpatory nor incendiary. It said, we don't know yet, and that ignorance is its own emergency. It said, wait. It also said, because I am human and markets reward certainty. These details lean toward authenticity. By dawn, a second video appeared. Same room, new angle. The paramedic's mask slips. Her voice is crisp as a studio take. If they die, they die. The new footage bore the credentials watermark that vendors sold to content-hungry platforms, a little green badge with a hash link, a chain of custody ledger, a 1,000-bit proof of provenance. The badge made our servers purr. Traffic spiked. Ezra's tie brightened. By noon, protesters were in the streets outside the hospital. People don't wait for badges, people wait for feeling. At 3 p.m., the hospital released a complete recording. 90 minutes of a training exercise on triage under duress. The paramedic's line in context was instruction, you tag blue when resources are exhausted. It's the worst day you'll ever have. If they die because you lost the war, not the patient. Our clip had cut the paragraph. Very human editing, or a machine mimicking a human's worst habit. We pushed a correction as fast as we could. It was honest, contrite, and a little proud that we'd had doubts in print. The correction traveled half as far, half as fast. Outside, somebody threw a bottle at a van. At 7 p.m., a grocery store shut its doors to avoid becoming a stage. At 8:30, an influencer with 500,000 berserkers posted our correction, but edited so the humility evaporated and the questions became assertions. The beast wears your face when it bites. Then, in a sick twist that cost me 2 friends and a job offer, a third video dropped. It was me on the newsroom terrace recording an apology into my phone. The skyline was ours. The coffee stain on the railing was ours. My voice was mine. I knew it was fake, I said, and I ran it because fake sells. I had not said that. I had not even thought it. But if you paused the clip and zoomed in, the vein on my temple beat at the right pulse. If you looked at my eyes, you could see the tiny refraction of the traffic light across the street, green to yellow. We tested the reflection against the city's traffic timing database. It matched. We checked the celestial position of the moon in the lake behind me. It matched. Ava came to my desk and watched the clip twice, then 3 times. She turned her phone off as if that mattered. The reflections are right because they're simulated from first principles, she said quietly. They can do global illumination in real time on consumer cards now. If we can't catch light, we catch life. How? The motor cortex twitches. The randoms, Poisson shot noise in the retina, microsaccade patterns, ticks we aren't even aware we have. The bot learned you. Did you upload your fitness tracker data to any personalization service? I stared at her. Look, none of this is admissible in court, she added, then paused. Scratch that. Courts don't care about truth anymore. They care about minimizing civic harm. That's tomorrow. Tonight is your choice. I did not sleep. The protests burned low. At 2:14 a.m., our servers went dark for 12 minutes. When they came back, our article had a new paragraph. It quoted me on the terrace. It bore the green badge. I walked into Ezra's office at dawn. The tie was grey. He looked old. He said, "We've been compromised," and then, as if it hurt him, "I need to suspend you while we investigate." I nodded because nodding was the only choice that didn't involve screaming. On the sidewalk, an ambulance went by, siren cutting the light like a knife. I moved aside this time, not because I trusted the siren, but because I trusted the driver wanted to live. Conclusion of episode 1. I lost my byline not because I was wrong, but because our systems preferred a reality that could be hashed, even if the hash was of a lie. I had expected a public fight. Instead, I met a private void. The war was unwinnable, and it had not even admitted itself as a war. The last thing I did before turning in my badge was text Ava. If light can be faked, we'll chase dust. Dust, she replied. The chaos of motes in sunlight no renderer gets right. Not over time, I said. She wrote back one word. Muons. Episode 2, The Museum of Errors. There is a salt mine 2 hours outside the city where somebody decided that the only safe place for our memory was underground. They called it the Museum of Errors, a joke for the donors and a warning for the rest of us. You descended in a caged elevator with a miner's helmet and a visitor's badge that did not beep. The air tasted like hands. Ava brought me because I had nowhere else to be and because she had discovered something that didn't fit any of her boxes. Also because the museum had a policy. No freelance visitors. They made exceptions for people who could string a sentence without adding an exclamation point at the end. Analog trumps digital, the curator said in the intake room, like a priest declaratively elevating the host. Her name was Sister Catalina, though the church was less involved than the name implied. She had been a statistician before she caught the faith of fragility. Film stock, tape, paper with acid, silver grain that is indifferent to your plugins. And the Muons? I asked, so she would know I had not arrived empty-headed. She smiled. Yes, our perfect little cosmic scribbles. Particles born in the upper atmosphere leave tracks in emulsion. You can't fake muons without lying to physics at scale, and lying to physics at scale leaves fingerprints. That's our new refrain. She led us into the Gallery of Masters, where they kept canonical recordings, events that had settled into the marrow of culture so deeply that any attempt to replicate them would be an act of either homage or terrorism. There were election nights captured on 16mm reels with their perforations like teeth. There were war broadcasts with tape hiss like rain. There was documentary footage of a hospital triage exercise, ours, shot by a visiting film student who happened to be in the wrong hallway with the right camera. We asked to see it. In a booth built of glass and humility, we watched the raw film roll through a telecine machine older than me. The paramedic's hands shook slightly as she demonstrated moves on a mannequin. The line, "If they die," landed differently in a room that smelled of salt and oil. It was not cruel. It was despair making itself useful. When we rewound and looked for the muon streaks, the micro-scratches, the random bright pokes, Ava nodded. This is a master. A master, Sister Catalina said sharply. Not the master. We all felt the cold then, though the room's thermostat was stable. The curator stopped the machine and looked at Ava the way a chess player looks at the opponent's hand on a queen. What are you suggesting? Ava pointed to the upper left corner of the frame and then to the fourth frame from the splice. These streaks reappear. Not perfectly, but with a pattern. Cosmic rays don't do patterns. This is an algorithm using a cosmic template and dithering it. No renderer gets dust right, but somebody taught one to get muon right enough to pass most eyeballs. So the film is fake? I asked, my stomach clenching. The film is real film, Ava said. Real chemicals, real sprockets, but the image on it, the grain, has been reprinted from a digital model with sympathetic noise, like growing a pearl around a plastic bead. Sister Catalina pressed her knuckles into the table, and I heard religion crack. How would one do this? Contact printing from an OLED array, said a voice from the doorway. A young man stood there with a smile that had cost him friends. You lower the screen into the emulsion in the dark, rinse in developer and dry it under a muon lamp. A muon lamp, I repeated, stupid as a tourist. A device that emits a distribution of high-energy particles approximating cosmic showers. There are legal ones for scientific calibration. There are illegal ones that leak. The illegal ones leave a signature in the emulsion if they're sloppy. The legal ones leave a signature in the camera logs. If you steal the legal one's signature, you can... Yeah, Ava knew him. Kai, she said flatly. You did this. It wasn't a question. I did some of this, he said, but not to lie. to test. The museum asked for hardening. I obliged. They hired me because I know how a liar thinks. Sister Catalina closed her eyes. We do not run red teams with live ammunition. You already do, he said gently. Every donor with a vanity project asks you to certify their past. Every platform with a lawsuit asks you to validate chain of custody for content that their own algorithms re-encoded 10 times. You live in the blast zone. I looked around the gallery at the reels with their labels like gravestones. If the master is a counterfeit that passes your tests, then nothing is holy. Ava shook her head. There's one more test. She pulled from her bag a device that looked like a child's kaleidoscope smashed into a compass. A radiometric granularity scope, she said for my benefit. It measures the variance of micrograin reflectance under polarized light, looking for stress patterns in the dried emulsion. She shone it at the film. The scope sang in a register only engineers enjoy, a chirp like a bird learning code. On her screen, a heat map bloomed. See the periodic stress ridges? That's an OLED grid. You can't escape the lattice. Real film exposed through a lens is messier in a different way. Sister Catalina let out the breath of someone shown a path off a cliff. So we can tell. For now, Ava said, but every detection becomes a target. You turned munes into a talisman. Someone turned them into a bait. In the cafe carved from salt, I drank a coffee that tasted like the past. Kai sat across from me with the shamelessness of the young and necessary. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you're the last person who still hopes that a page can save us, he said, not unkindly. And because what's coming will make pages irrelevant unless we build something slower. Slower. Rituals, he said. Protocols of presence. A way to say I was there that cannot be delegated to a hash. I looked at Ava. She nodded once, as if he was just admitting the obvious. Back in the gallery, Sister Catalina wrote a note to her donors. It said, "We are updating our verification criteria." I could see her hand steady by force. She had not asked whether the paramedic film was the original. Maybe she already knew the safest truth, that in a world of perfect reconstruction, the value of a master was not in its purity, but in its custodianship. As we left, we passed a group of visitors in helmets pointing at a war reel with the reverence tourists bring to cathedrals. Their guide said something about bravery. One of the visitors asked, "Is it real?" The guide smiled and said, "It's ours." Conclusion of Episode 2. The museum wasn't a vault for truth, it was a hospice. The munes weren't proof, they were a lullaby. On the drive back, Ava asked me what I would build if I couldn't rely on video or badges. I said, a dinner table. She said, make it a network. Kai said, make it a gym for discernment. None of us laughed. Episode 3. The Ministry of Versions. Courts used to ask, what happened? The new tribunal asked, which version least injures the civic fabric? There were reasons for the pivot, none of them satisfying. The legal standard had mutated under pressure from synthetic certainty. You could no longer punish perjury because the juror's own eyes were unreliable witnesses. I was subpoenaed on a Tuesday. The badge on the envelope was green. The case was a slander suit against me, brought by a man named Brigham Colt, Brig to his followers, who had taken my questioning of the paramedic clip as a personal attack on his brand of warfare. I had written a paragraph about how speed rewards malice. He'd posted a video of me allegedly confessing to malice. Now he wanted damages for the harm my lies had done to his engagement. He also wanted my apology algorithmically pinned to the top of my feed for a year. The Ministry of Versions was a courthouse built inside a former television studio with lighting rigged for gravity. Judge Paloma presided with a voice like a metronome. The parties were allowed to present world lines, simulations of events constructed from data, testimony, and the engines that turned both into cinema. Plaintiffs would show one chain of cause and effect, defendants another, and the jurors would evaluate which future consequence each version endorsed. The Rashomon engine lived in the pit. It was not called that officially, but everyone called it that. It took in camera vectors, LiDAR scans, documents and memory traces. It spat out plausible movies. It also took in the arguments about what should count as plausible. Briggs' counsel, Ree, stood with the confidence of someone who had never apologized for an error. "Exhibit 1, she said, and the wall became the hospital again. In this version, my article sounded like a siren. It cut to the protest, then to a riot, then to a shot of a cowering child with smoke in his eyes. Then, the terrace video of me confessing. It was so aesthetically convincing I felt my muscles clench, an old dog failing to ignore a bell. "Exhibit 2, my lawyer said. I had one, a thin man with patience for being underestimated. The wall displayed the training context video. The Rashomon engine played a side-by-side showing that the phrase had been instruction, not cruelty. Then it showed the analog film in the salt mine with its periodic stress ridges, Ava's lattice, highlighted in hellish red to indicate the print was born of a screen. "Your Honor," Ree said sweetly, "the defense just undermined itself. It calls the analog film fake and asks us to use it as evidence. If the master can't be trusted, only the majority consensus remains." Judge Paloma steepled her fingers. The jurors, 11 people and a stochastic rounding system that stood in for a 12th, watched a split screen of two realities so professionally executed that any difference between them felt like a preference rather than a discrepancy. Then the child witness, Noah, took the stand. He had been in the protest that night and had seen something. I hoped he would be a human anchor, a memory rooted in body. He was small, 12 maybe, with the serious eyes of somebody who had practiced being heard. "Tell us what you saw, Noah," the judge said. "I saw a man in a mask push a woman down, but she got up," he said. "I saw a bottle bounce off a van and it didn't break. I saw a dog eating a hot dog." The court smiled. Then we all remembered the world and we stopped. "Did you see anyone hurting anyone on purpose?" Ree asked. "I saw a lot of recording," Noah said. "Mostly recording." "Did you see the defendant?" my lawyer asked, nodding toward me. "I saw him on my phone later," Noah said. "He said he knew. He said fake cells." "Objection," my lawyer said. "That's the clip under dispute." "Sustained," Judge Paloma said. "But the child's exposure is relevant to civic harm." She turned to the jury. "Remember, we are not evaluating what happened. We are evaluating which version of acknowledgement best preserves cohesion given the media environment." I wanted to throw something. My lawyer squeezed my arm. "Let it roll," he whispered. Ava testified next, explaining the stress lattice and the PRNU breathing and the audio subtitle grid. She spoke as if science could still pierce fog. The Rashomon engine rendered as she spoke. Mu maps dancing, PRNU fields pulsing, muon streaks jittering in believable arcs. It was a visual opera of detection, and in the lobby the popcorn would have sold out. Ree smiled when she cross-examined. "Ms. Kern, is it fair to say that every test you described, however clever, becomes a feature request for the next generation of deception?" "Yes," Ava said. "That's overdue. It's still the right thing to build." "And can your method, given an unlimited budget and access to your public lectures, be bypassed?" "Yes." "Then the only stable solution is social, not technical." "Yes," Ava said again, after a small pause. "But good tools can give the social solution a place to stand." The judge nodded, as if she had been craving an admission that technology was not a god. When the arguments rested, she gave instructions to the jury that used words I had never heard in a courtroom. Harm horizon, cohesion delta, confidence-adjusted restitution. The jury didn't decide whether I was right or wrong. They decided whether my refusal to append an algorithmically pinnable apology would inflict more damage than the deterrent effect of punishing me. They ruled for Brigadier. I had to pin an apology for 12 months. The text was templated by the ministry and included phrases that made me itch. "We regret the harm produced by the velocity of our publication, regardless of scientific content." It read like a surrender to a god who demanded offerings of syntax. My lawyer said I could appeal. He also said I would lose. I walked out of the courthouse past the news vans and the street preachers. I noticed something small and felt ashamed that I still noticed. The dust in the afternoon light did not behave exactly like the dust in a Hollywood trailer. It fell without drama. A woman approached me from the side like a shadow making a choice. She wore a dark jacket with no logo. "You're not done," she said. "Who are you?" I asked, exhausted. "Call us the Menders," she said. "We host dinners." No phones. People show up and speak in the first person. We cross-examine gently. We keep a ledger of promises made and promises kept. We didn't have a name until the world asked for one. Why me? You still write in sentences longer than 3 clauses. That's a transferable skill. And what do the Menders do when someone fakes a confession on your behalf? I asked, bitter. She smiled sadly. We ask you to wash the dishes and tell us a story we can interrupt. Conclusion of episode 3. I lost a case that wasn't about truth. The verdict stung less than the metric that replaced it. Harm minimization as a judicial North Star felt like asking a compass to point to the warmest place rather than north. I wanted to be angry at the judge. I was angry at the century instead. That night, I went to a dinner under a skylight with no recording allowed. Someone told a story about a car crash and changed their mind about who was at fault halfway through. We passed bread around the table. I left with a dish towel in my pocket, a token the Menders used to say, "You showed up." Episode 4. Anchors. The first rule of the anchor was proximity. If I couldn't place my palm on your shoulder and feel the heat of being alive, we didn't count each other as witnesses. The second rule was slowness. Every claim had to be repeated on 3 different nights with 3 different groups before we wrote it in the ledger. The third rule was humility. We did not certify events for the world. We bound ourselves to them. We met in a community hall that smelled like a high school gym. There was a chalkboard on one wall and an analog clock that ran a few minutes fast. I bought it at a thrift store because it ticked loudly. We needed the tick to remind us that time is not a bar graph. The Menders were building cells like ours in other cities, their ledgers braided by friends of friends. We had a pen that never left the room. We had a table with scars. The first surprise was Omar, a neighbor I'd nodded to for 5 years without learning his last name. Former cryptographer, he said, now gardener. I left because I got tired of designing guarantees for people who didn't want them, he said. But I know how to write a protocol that uses bodies. A handshake? I said, a little too glib. A handshake you can't outsource, he said. He laid out a method with the economy of a good poem. When a witness testified, 3 other witnesses would corroborate one small sensory detail each, the smell of a hallway, the temperature of a room, the texture of a coat. We catalogued those corroborations with drawings and words and, oddly effective, spices. A little jar of cumin on a shelf labeled Hospital Waiting Room, North Wing, January 12th. A pinch of cedar shavings labeled Jury Room Bench, March 4th. It wasn't science. It was something older, cues to trap recall. We were not trying to build a forensic trail. We were trying to make forgetting harder. "Isn't this just cosplay?" someone asked. "Of what?" Omar said. "Citizens." The second surprise was Rue, a teenager who showed up wearing a hoodie patched with memes that didn't exist when I was young enough to memorize them. Rue was a hacktivist, which in the new economy meant an expert in both static analysis and etiquette. "Information wants a chaperone," she said, and we added that aphorism to the chalkboard. She protected our group from 100 small nuisances, geo-fencing glitches, smart lamp firmware that listened too hard, a drone that thought our hall was a public space by default. "They call it ambient computing," she said one night, disabling a camera in a smoke detector. "It's really amphibian computing. It tries to be both land and water, and it drowns you if you don't watch it." I told the group the story of the paramedic carefully. I told it without the terrorist confession because the room didn't need to hear me deny a thing I hadn't done. I told them about the salt mine. I told them about the court. I told them about the ambulance at 7th and Grey and my own failure to move. The room interrupted me as promised, not to trap me, but to make me look again. What did the coffee smell like? Were the hospital tiles matte or glazed? Did the siren modulate up or down when you stepped back? I answered, and felt ridiculous until I didn't. The third surprise was my mother, Elena, who started coming on Thursdays. She had never read my pieces. She said they made her nervous. She cooked instead. She came to the Anchor because she believed in feeding people in a world that had decided to snack on outrage. She told a story about the day her phone showed her a video of me announcing that I would no longer speak to her because she'd voted the wrong way. She cried and then laughed. "They almost got me," she said, pinching my cheek as if to confirm my texture. The room laughed too, illegal relief. Then the twist. On a rainy night I still smell when I opened the spice drawer, Ava arrived late, soaked, eyes bright the way people look after they've seen the worst, and found an idea. She said to me, "I need you to put on a coat and come with me." Now. We drove to a warehouse by the river, the kind of building that had held books once, and then pallets, and then disillusion. She led me inside, past a row of sleeping machines, into a studio dense with cables and a single chair. The wall was a screen. On it was a paused frame, me on the newsroom terrace saying the words I had never said. "You found the source?" I asked, fingers cold. "Not exactly," she said. She gestured toward the chairs. 3 people stood up from the dark. One was Kai, hands in his pockets. One was Judge Paloma without her robe. One was, to my shock, Ezra, my old editor, tie a quiet black wound. "What is this?" I asked. "An intervention," Ezra said. He looked older than Court. "We found the pipeline that produced your terrorist confession. It replicates your motor microsignals using a daily liveness token you gave away without knowing. The token is embedded in the authentication you perform each time you unlock your phone with your face. The companies promised those tokens were one-way, non-invertible. They were wrong or they lied. Someone broke the one-wayness by correlating the tokens with publicly available video of you for years. They built a motion engine that reproduces your non-volition moves. The confession is a composite built on my digital shadow, I said, throat dry. Yes, Paloma said, and the problem is worse. The pipeline is not illegal. It is licensed. It's marketed as confession as a service for PR disasters. The law does not prohibit consenting adults from synthesizing apologies in their likeness. The platform asserts that by holding an account, you consented in principle. I didn't consent to that. Your consent was a scroll and a checkbox, Ezra said, ashen. I should have known to tell you. I didn't. I believed the green badges meant we'd be all right. That's my fault. I felt heat rise in me that had nothing to do with guilt. So what's the intervention? You show me a machine and then leave me with a new species of impotence. Kai stepped forward. No, we propose a hijack. Ava smiled for the first time that day. We don't sabotage, we invert. We'll feed the pipeline a series of synthetic liveness tokens that are yours, generated from your old interview footage but warped at a microscale so no human eye can see. The algorithm will swallow them and adapt. When the next confession as a service tries to render you, it will show a glitch, a micro-twitch your body never makes. Omar will see it. Rue will flag it. We'll have an anchor in the adversary. I thought every detection becomes a feature request, I said. It does, Ava said, but every feature request has a cost. We can make the cost high enough that the service becomes unprofitable for casual liars. We will not stop state actors. We can slow the rest. Judge Paloma raised a hand. One caveat. If we do this, and it becomes known that we do this, the ministry will consider your future testimony suspect. The ministry already did, I said, and surprised myself by laughing. We ran the hijack. It took an hour. The screen wobbled with a field of me's, thousands of almost eyes and almost jaws, microsaccades modulated by priors we selected with dice. We introduced a controlled stutter at a sub-saccadic level, one that would enter the pipeline's learned template for me. It was a scar only an adversarial network would notice. We called it the anchor twitch, partly as a joke, partly as a claim. 2 weeks later, a campaign rolled out a confession video from a politician with my jaw and eyes, but a different suit. The anchor twitch was there, a tiny, involuntary move my body never made. Ava texted me a single checkmark. Omar added a jar of black pepper to the shelf labeled River Warehouse, April. Rue put a sticky note on the clock. We can still count. The final twist came in a smaller package. A woman with my mother's voice left a message saying she had fallen. The audio was plausible down to the breath between words. The message had no badge. I called my mother on the landline we'd set up for emergencies because the anchor hated mobile. She answered on the third ring. "You fell?" I asked. "I fell," she said, annoyed. "But yesterday—" "Your friend with the hoodie fixed the rug. Why are you calling now?" I sat on the steps and cried. Not because she was okay, but because I had almost fallen into the hole again. Rue put a hand on my shoulder and stood there, a teenager calculating the number of ways to shore up an old man. We built the anchor out. We wrote our own ritual. Once a week, we stood in a circle and recited a litany. I will speak only what I have seen. I will name what I inferred. I will separate what I know by habit from what I know by witness. I will name my sources. We gave up trying to certify the world. We certified one another's presence. People came. Some needed absolution. We had none to give. Some wanted weapons. We had dish towels and spice jars and the steady tick of a clock. Some wanted to join a cult. We made them clear a table. A journalist in me kept writing in the margins. The pieces were quieter now. They didn't travel far. The platforms didn't know what to do with paragraphs that didn't attach a face. I learned to be satisfied with being read by those who had sat across a table from me. I learned to stop signing my name and start signing my attendance. One night, Ezra came by with a thin folder. He laid it on the table without ceremony. Inside were printed emails, archival, on paper that smelled like a library. He wanted me to read one. It was from him to an administrator at the paper, dated 2 nights before the terrace video went live. It said, "Our systems lack safeguards. Our verification appears genuine, but is a gown over a patient with a fever. If we run this, if we run anything, we are liable to become an accomplice to the next operator who stamps a green badge on a sin. We need to slow down, slower than the ad slots allow." He looked at me. "They ignored it," he said. "Then they asked me to add the badge to your piece anyway." I did it. I regret it the way a soldier regrets pressing the button he was told would defend a city and instead burned a field. I put the spices back on their shelf. I erased a date from the chalkboard and wrote a new one. I said, "Stay for the dishes." He did. Conclusion of episode 4. It turned out there was an anchor, but it wasn't a checksum. It was a chain of living people and a discipline. It was proximity and repetition and the humility to partition your certainty. It was knowing that a jar labeled cinnamon contained cinnamon because you were in the room when we poured it in. It was being small on purpose. Coda, the sky that refuses a badge. On a morning months after, an ambulance shot down 7th and Grey again with lights that could have sold out a cinema. I stepped aside and tugged a man backward by his sleeve. He glared, saw the truck, and nodded thanks. The siren Dopplered past. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was theater. In my pocket was a dish towel. On my tongue was coffee. In my body was a memory of my mother's hand on mine in a kitchen no platform could reconstruct if it tried. In my mind was a list of people who would come if I called, and a list of people I would go to if they did. We were living in Rashomon on steroids, yes, and in an agnostic cauldron. But in that cauldron we had invented a discipline anyone could practice. Speak what you have seen, name what you infer, test your memory against the bodies of those who also stood there, and refuse to let a green badge replace a hand on a shoulder. The world might be a black hole of genuine belief, but we could be small suns, not to burn away the darkness, but to light a table well enough to see the bread. I don't know if civilization will survive the simulacra. I do know this. I have a place to anchor. It is not a server farm. It is not a museum. It is a room with a clock and the voices of people who have chosen to be slow. When I cannot be sure of what I see, I anchor to who I stand beside. That's not the world I trained for as a journalist. It's the world I belong to now.
They tell us to verify everything twice. But when everything looks true, how do you know? I keep chasing the story, and now the story is chasing me. How do I know?